What if I told you that sometimes the darkest moments of your life are just the universe preparing you for the most incredible transformation you never saw coming? What if the cardboard box you sleep on tonight becomes the foundation for an empire tomorrow? This isn't just another rags to riches fairy tale. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about Maria Santos, a 28-year-old woman who went from counting spare change for a cup of coffee to sitting in boardrooms worth billions of dollars. But here's the twist that will make your heart race. It wasn't luck, inheritance, or winning the lottery that changed her life. It was something far more powerful and unexpected. 3 years ago, Maria was invisible to the world, sleeping behind a grocery store in downtown Chicago, clutching a worn photograph of her daughter she hadn't seen in 2 years. Today, she's the CEO of one of the fastest-growing companies in America, featured on magazine covers, and has helped thousands of homeless individuals rebuild their lives. But the journey between these 2 points? It's darker, more challenging, and more beautiful than anything Hollywood could ever script. It involves a mysterious billionaire who wasn't what he seemed, a life-changing decision made in a moment of desperation, and a discovery that would shake the very foundations of how we think about homelessness, human potential, and second chances. Are you ready to discover how one woman's worst nightmare became the catalyst for not just her own transformation, but for changing an entire system? Because Maria's story isn't just about escaping poverty. It's about rewriting the rules of what's possible when someone truly believes in your potential, even when you've forgotten how to believe in yourself. This is that story, and by the end, you'll never look at someone experiencing homelessness the same way again. Maria Santos pressed her back against the cold brick wall of Henderson's grocery store, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. The October wind cut through the alley like a knife, carrying with it the smell of rotting vegetables from the dumpster nearby. She had been living in this alley for 3 weeks now, and every morning she woke up hoping it was all just a terrible nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was her reality, and the worn photograph in her pocket was the only reminder of a life she once had. The picture showed her daughter Emma, bright-eyed and smiling, taken just 2 years ago when Maria still had a job, an apartment, and hope for the future. Now Emma lived with Maria's sister in California, and Maria hadn't spoken to her in months. The shame was too overwhelming. How had it come to this? Maria often asked herself this question as she stared up at the stars between the buildings. Just 18 months ago, she had been a successful marketing coordinator at Peterson Industries, earning enough money to support herself and Emma as a single mother. She had dreams, plans, and a small savings account that was growing every month. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and stability felt like luxury when you grew up in foster care like Maria had. The first crack in her carefully constructed life came when Peterson Industries announced massive layoffs. The economy was struggling, and the marketing department was considered non-essential. Maria watched as her colleagues cleaned out their desks one by one, and she knew her turn was coming. When it finally happened, she received a small severance package and assurances that the layoffs were temporary, that they would call her back when business improved. Maria wasn't worried at first. She had some money saved, and her skills were valuable. She updated her resume and started applying for jobs immediately. The first month went by quickly with interviews and follow-up calls. The second month brought fewer responses, but she remained optimistic. By the third month, the savings account was running dangerously low, and the job market seemed to have completely dried up. The stress began to take its toll on everything. Emma, who was only 8 at the time, started asking why Mommy seemed so sad all the time. Maria tried to shield her daughter from the growing financial pressure, but children sense these things. The electricity bill went unpaid first, then the water. Maria found herself choosing between buying groceries and paying rent, and groceries always won because she couldn't bear to see Emma go hungry. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday morning in March. Maria stared at the legal documents, reading them over and over, hoping the words would somehow change. She had 30 days to come up with 3 months of back rent plus fees, or they would be forced to leave. The amount might as well have been $1 million for all the chance she had of finding it. That night, Maria sat Emma down and tried to explain that they were going to have to go live with Aunt Sarah for a while. Emma cried and asked if it was because she had been bad, if that's why they couldn't stay in their home anymore. Maria held her daughter close and promised her that none of this was her fault, that sometimes grown-ups go through difficult times, but that everything would be okay. The lie tasted bitter in her mouth. The trip to California was the hardest thing Maria had ever done. Her sister Sarah had agreed to take Emma temporarily, just until Maria could get back on her feet. Sarah had a stable job, a nice house, and could provide Emma with the security that Maria couldn't give her anymore. Logically, Maria knew it was the right decision. Emotionally, it felt like tearing her heart out of her chest. Standing in Sarah's driveway, watching Emma run inside to see her cousins, Maria felt like she was disappearing. Without her role as a mother, without her job, without her home, who was she? The question haunted her as she drove back to Chicago with barely enough gas money to make the trip. Sarah had offered to let Maria stay too, but Maria's pride wouldn't allow it. She convinced herself that she would find a job quickly, that this separation from Emma would only last a few weeks. She would get an apartment, rebuild her life, and bring her daughter home. It was just a temporary setback, but temporary stretched into months. The job market was brutal, and Maria discovered that being unemployed for an extended period made her even less attractive to potential employers. The gap in her resume grew longer, and with it, the likelihood of finding decent work decreased. She bounced between friends' couches for a while, but eventually wore out her welcome. Everyone had their own struggles, their own bills to pay, and housing a jobless single mother indefinitely wasn't sustainable for anyone. The night Maria first slept in her car, she told herself it was just for one night. She had parked in a 24-hour Walmart parking lot, figuring security wouldn't bother her if she stayed out of sight. The back seat of her 10-year-old Honda was cramped and uncomfortable, but it was better than the street. At least she still had some dignity, some privacy. The car lasted 3 months. During the day, Maria would go to the library to use the computer and search for jobs, applying to everything from fast food positions to office work. She showered at a local gym where she still maintained a membership, using the address of a former coworker for mail. To anyone who looked at her during the day, she appeared to be just another person going about their business. The secret of her homelessness was carefully hidden behind clean clothes and a practiced smile. But maintaining the facade was expensive and exhausting. The car payments became impossible to keep up with, especially when she could barely afford gas and food. The repo man found her on a Wednesday morning while she was sleeping in the Walmart parking lot. Maria woke to the sound of her car being loaded onto a tow truck, and she watched helplessly as her last piece of security disappeared down the highway. That's how she ended up in the alley behind Henderson's grocery store. The manager, Mr. Chun, was kinder than most. He didn't call the police when he found her sleeping there, and he sometimes left day-old sandwiches near the back door. He never spoke to her directly about her situation, but his small acts of kindness kept her alive during those first terrifying nights on the street. The street was nothing like what Maria had imagined homelessness would be. It wasn't just about not having a place to sleep, though the physical discomfort was overwhelming. It was about becoming invisible, about watching the world continue around you while you existed in a parallel universe of survival. People walked past her every day without making eye contact, as if homelessness might be contagious. The worst part wasn't the hunger, though she often went days with only one meal. It wasn't the cold, though Chicago winters were brutal when you had nowhere to go. The worst part was the shame that ate away at her from the inside. Every time she thought about Emma, safe and warm in Sarah's house, Maria felt like she was drowning in her own failure as a mother. She started avoiding mirrors because she couldn't bear to see what she was becoming. Her clothes, even when clean, began to hang loose on her shrinking frame. Her hair, once her pride, became dull and unwashed despite her efforts to maintain some semblance of cleanliness. But more than her physical appearance, it was the look in her eyes that scared her most. The hope was fading, replaced by something harder and more desperate. Maria established routines to maintain her sanity. She woke up every morning at dawn and walked to the public library when it opened. She spent hours on the computers, still applying for jobs, still believing that tomorrow might be different. She knew the locations of every soup kitchen and food pantry within walking distance. She knew which businesses would let her use their restrooms and which ones would call security. The other homeless individuals in the area became her unexpected community. There was Frank, a Vietnam veteran who taught her which areas were safe to sleep in and which ones to avoid. There was Jenny, a former nurse who shared her medications when Maria developed a persistent cough. There was Miguel, barely 18, who reminded Maria heartbreakingly of what Emma might become if Maria couldn't turn her life around. They looked out for each other in small ways, sharing information about where to find food or warm clothes. They never talked much about their past lives or how they ended up on the streets. Those stories were too painful, too private. Instead, they focused on the immediate needs of survival: food, shelter, safety. But even within this community, Maria felt isolated. The others had given up hope of returning to their former lives, but Maria couldn't let go of the belief that this was temporary. She still called Emma once a week from a payphone, pretending that everything was fine, that mommy was just working very hard to make a better life for them. The lies came easier with practice, but they poisoned something inside her. As winter approached, the urgency of Maria's situation intensified. The alley behind Henderson's was becoming unbearable, and she knew she needed to find somewhere warmer or she might not survive the cold months ahead. The shelters were always full, with waiting lists that stretched for weeks. Maria had put her name on every list in the city, but her number never seemed to come up. It was during one of these desperate searches for shelter that Maria first saw him. She was sitting on a bench outside the downtown library, trying to work up the courage to call Emma, when a man in an expensive suit sat down beside her. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Most people in expensive suits hurried past homeless individuals, but this man sat down as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Cold night," he said simply, his voice warm and conversational. Maria nodded, unsure if she should respond. In her months on the street, she had learned to be wary of strangers who seemed too friendly. But something about this man felt different. He didn't have the predatory energy she had learned to recognize, nor the false cheerfulness of well-meaning volunteers who would disappear back to their comfortable lives. "I'm David," he said, not extending his hand, but offering his name like a gift. "Maria," she replied quietly, surprised by her own response. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the city wind down for the evening. Office workers hurried past, eager to get home to their families and their warm houses. Maria tried not to think about what they would do when the library closed, and she had to return to the alley. "I used to sit on this exact bench 25 years ago," David said suddenly. "Different circumstances, but the same feeling of watching the world happen around me while I try to figure out how to rejoin it." Maria looked at him more carefully, trying to imagine this well-dressed man ever being in a situation like hers. It seemed impossible, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he understood loss in a way that only someone who had experienced it could. "What changed?" Maria asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. David smiled, expression both sad and hopeful. "Someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself anymore. Someone saw potential where I only saw failure." They talked until the library closed, and David walked away without offering Maria money or advice or promises. He just said goodbye and that maybe they would see each other again. Maria watched him disappear into the crowd, wondering if he had been real or just a figment of her desperate imagination. But the next evening, he was there again, sitting on the same bench as if he had been waiting for her. This time he brought coffee, hot and sweet, and they shared it while talking about nothing in particular. David never asked Maria about her situation directly, never made her feel like she had to justify or explain her circumstances. Instead, he talked about books, about the city, about small observations that made Maria remember what it felt like to be a person instead of just a problem to be solved. These conversations became the highlight of Maria's increasingly dark days. David appeared irregularly, sometimes several days in a row, sometimes not for a week. But knowing he might be there gave Maria a reason to go to the library bench each evening, gave her something to look forward to beyond just surviving another night. It was 3 weeks into these encounters that David finally revealed who he was. Maria had been telling him about her daughter, about the guilt that consumed her every time she thought about Emma growing up without her. She was crying, something she rarely allowed herself to do, when David quietly said, "What if I told you there might be a way to change all of this?" Maria looked up at him through her tears, expecting another well-intentioned but empty offer of help. Instead, she saw something else in his eyes, something that looked like genuine possibility. "My name is David Richardson," he said, "and I think you might be exactly the person I've been looking for." The name meant nothing to Maria at first, but David explained that he was the founder and CEO of Richardson Enterprises, a company worth several $billion. Maria stared at him in disbelief. Billionaires didn't sit on park benches talking to homeless women. They didn't share coffee and conversation with people like her. But as David continued talking, explaining his unconventional approach to business and his belief in human potential, Maria began to understand that nothing about this encounter was typical. David wasn't offering her charity or a job out of pity. He was offering her something much more dangerous and much more valuable. He was offering her a chance to prove that she was more than her circumstances, more than her mistakes, more than the sum of everything that had gone wrong in her life. But taking that chance would require Maria to risk the little bit of herself she had left, to bet everything on a possibility that seemed too good to be true. As they sat in the growing darkness, with the city lights beginning to twinkle around them, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely overwhelming. Tomorrow, David had said, everything could begin to change. But first, Maria had to decide if she was brave enough to believe that change was possible. Maria stared at David Richardson in the pale morning light filtering through the library windows. She had barely slept that night, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. Could this really be happening? Was this successful businessman actually sitting here offering her some kind of opportunity, or was her desperation making her imagine things that weren't real? "I know this is overwhelming," David said gently, as if reading her thoughts. "And I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'd like you to hear me out completely before you make any decisions." Maria nodded, clutching her worn backpack closer to her chest. Everything she owned in the world was in that bag, and it wasn't much. A change of clothes, some basic toiletries, the photograph of Emma, and a notebook where she still wrote down job leads that never seemed to pan out. David pulled out a tablet and showed her a presentation, but not the kind she was expecting. Instead of corporate profits and business strategies, the screen showed photographs of people, men and women of all ages, all backgrounds, all looking directly at the camera with expressions of determination and hope. "These are graduates of what I call the Phoenix program," David explained. "Every single person you see here was once homeless, unemployed, or struggling with circumstances that seemed impossible to overcome. Now they're all successful professionals working in various capacities within my company and others." Maria looked more closely at the faces. A young man in a business suit standing in front of a modern office building. A woman in chef's attire holding up an award. An older gentleman in a construction hat breaking ground on what looked like a major project. These people looked confident, successful, nothing like the broken individuals she imagined they must have been before. "What exactly is the Phoenix program?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David leaned back, his expression growing more serious. "It's an experimental approach to human development that I've been working on for the past 8 years. The basic premise is this: I believe that many people who end up in situations like yours aren't there because they lack ability or intelligence. They're there because of a series of circumstances, bad luck, and systemic failures that would have broken anyone. He scrolled through more photos, pausing on a woman about Maria's age holding a young child. This is Rebecca Martinez. 3 years ago, she was living in her car with her 2 children after her husband left, and she lost her job due to company downsizing. Today, she's the head of our customer relations department and makes more money than she ever thought possible. More importantly, she's rebuilt her confidence and her family's stability. Maria felt her heart skip a beat. The stories sounded so familiar, so painfully close to her own experience. How? She managed to ask. That's where it gets unconventional, David admitted. The Phoenix program isn't just about giving people jobs or housing. It's about complete life reconstruction from the ground up. Every participant goes through an intensive process that addresses not just their immediate needs, but the underlying patterns and skills that will determine their long-term success. He explained that the program lasted 18 months and was incredibly demanding. Participants lived in a residential facility where they had their own apartments, but were part of a structured community. The first 6 months focused on basic stability, physical health, mental health, financial literacy, and rebuilding fundamental life skills that poverty and trauma had eroded. The next 6 months involved intensive education and training in whatever field the participant showed aptitude for and interest in. Some people discovered talents they never knew they had. Others built upon skills from their previous lives. The education was personalized, fast-paced, and designed to create not just competence, but excellence. The final 6 months were spent in mentored work experience, gradually taking on more responsibility while still having support and guidance. By the end of the program, participants weren't just ready to rejoin the workforce. They were prepared to excel in it. But here's the part that makes this different from every other program out there, David continued. I don't just offer training and hope for the best. Everyone who successfully completes the Phoenix program is guaranteed a position within Richardson Enterprises or one of our partner companies. Not minimum wage work, but positions with real growth potential and competitive salaries. Maria felt dizzy trying to process everything David was telling her. Programs like this didn't exist in the real world, did they? People like her didn't get opportunities like this. There had to be a catch. Why would you do this? She asked. What do you get out of it? David's smile was both sad and knowing. Because 25 years ago, I was where you are now. Not homeless exactly, but broken in ways that felt just as hopeless. I had a business that failed spectacularly, lost everything I owned, and was facing bankruptcy and possibly prison for debts I couldn't pay. I was sitting on that same bench we met at, seriously considering whether life was worth continuing. He paused, looking out the window at the busy street. A stranger approached me that day, an elderly woman who had built a small business empire from nothing. She saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and she gave me a chance that changed everything. Not charity, but opportunity. Not a handout, but a hand up. Maria began to understand. You're paying it forward. More than that, David said. I genuinely believe that our current approach to homelessness and poverty is fundamentally flawed. We treat the symptoms instead of the causes. We offer temporary solutions instead of permanent transformation. The Phoenix program is my attempt to prove that with the right support, most people can not only recover from their worst circumstances, but actually excel beyond what they ever thought possible. He showed her more success stories, more photographs of transformed lives. Maria found herself getting caught up in the possibility, imagining herself in professional clothing, imagining Emma being proud to tell her friends about her successful mother. But reality crept back in. This sounds incredible, but I have to ask, what's the success rate? How many people actually make it through the program? David's expression grew more serious. About 60% complete the full 18 months. Of those, 95% are successfully employed within 6 months of graduation. But, Maria, I need to be completely honest with you about what this involves. He explained that the program was extraordinarily demanding, both personally and professionally. Participants had to confront not just their external circumstances, but all the internal patterns and beliefs that had contributed to their situations. They had to be willing to be completely vulnerable, to admit their mistakes, and to work harder than they had ever worked in their lives. There are no shortcuts and no exceptions, David said firmly. Everyone who enters the program is held to the same high standards. Some people find that too difficult and choose to leave. Others discover strengths they never knew they had and exceed every expectation. Maria thought about Emma, about the shame of their phone conversations where she pretended everything was fine. She thought about the growing hopelessness she felt each morning when she woke up in the alley, about the way people looked through her as if she didn't exist. If I said yes, she asked carefully, when would this start? Immediately. Today, if you're willing. I have a car waiting outside, and there's a room prepared for you at the Phoenix Center. You'll be able to shower, eat a real meal, and sleep in a bed tonight. Tomorrow, we begin the assessment process to determine your specific program track. It sounded too good to be true, which made Maria immediately suspicious. What do you want in return? What's the catch? David was quiet for a long moment. The catch is that this will be the hardest thing you've ever done. You'll be pushed to your absolute limits physically, mentally, and emotionally. You'll have to confront every mistake you've made, every fear you have, every reason you tell yourself that you don't deserve better than this. He leaned forward, his eyes intense but kind. The catch is that you'll have to believe you're worth saving, even when everything in your experience tells you otherwise. And some days, that belief will be the most difficult thing you've ever had to maintain. Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes. When was the last time someone had spoken to her about her worth, about her potential for something better? When was the last time someone had seen her as more than a problem to be solved or a person to be pitied? What about Emma? She asked. I can't just abandon my daughter for 18 months. The residential requirement is flexible for parents, David explained. Once you've completed the first phase and demonstrated stability, we can arrange for regular visits. Some participants have even had their children join them at the facility if that's what's best for the family. Everything is designed around successful outcomes, not arbitrary rules. Maria's mind was spinning. This opportunity seemed like a miracle, but accepting it would mean admitting that her current approach wasn't working. It would mean giving up the illusion of independence she had been clinging to and accepting help in a way that felt overwhelming. I need to know something, she said finally. Why me? You could help anyone. Why did you choose me? David smiled. I've been coming to that bench for months, watching people, having conversations. Most people in your situation have given up hope, or they're so focused on their immediate survival that they can't think beyond the next meal or the next place to sleep. But you still go to the library every day. You still apply for jobs. You still call your daughter and pretend everything is okay to protect her from worry. He gathered up the tablet and put it back in his briefcase. You haven't given up on yourself yet, even though you have every reason to. That tells me you have the strength to do this program. But more than that, in our conversations, I've seen glimpses of the person you were before all this happened. You're intelligent, thoughtful, and you care deeply about doing the right thing. Those are the exact qualities that make someone successful in the Phoenix program. Maria sat in silence, weighing everything David had told her. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab this lifeline and hold on tight. But another part of her was terrified. What if she failed? What if she wasn't strong enough or smart enough or worthy enough to succeed in this program? The fall from hope back to despair might be more than she could survive. What happens if I can't do it? She asked. What if I fail out of the program? Then you'll have tried, David said simply, and you'll have learned things about yourself that you can carry forward. We don't abandon anyone who makes a genuine effort. Even if someone doesn't complete the full program, we help them find stable housing and employment. No one leaves worse off than they arrived. Maria thought about her alternatives. She could continue sleeping in the alley behind Henderson's, hoping that somehow things would magically improve. She could try to find space in a shelter for the winter and hope she survived until spring. She could give up entirely and accept that this was her life now. Or she could take the terrifying leap of faith that David was offering. If I do this, she said slowly, I need to be able to call Emma regularly. I need to be able to explain to her what's happening in a way that makes sense. I can't just disappear from her life. Of course, David agreed immediately. Family connections are actually encouraged throughout the program. We found that people do better when they have something meaningful to work toward. Maria took a deep breath. The scared part of her mind was screaming warnings about trusting a stranger, about believing in something that seemed too good to be true. But underneath that fear was something else, a tiny spark of the person she used to be, the person who had dreams and plans and believed that hard work could lead to a better life. Okay, she said. The word coming out is barely more than a whisper. Yes, I want to do this. David's smile was radiant. Maria, I think you're about to surprise yourself with what you're capable of. As they stood up from the bench, Maria felt like she was stepping across an invisible line between her old life and something completely unknown. It was terrifying and exciting and completely overwhelming. The car David had mentioned was indeed waiting outside. A simple but clean sedan with a driver who greeted Maria respectfully, as if she were already someone important. As they drove through the city toward the Phoenix Center, Maria watched the familiar streets roll past, knowing that the next time she saw them, she would be different. The Phoenix Center was located in a restored industrial building on the outskirts of downtown, surrounded by gardens and walking paths. It looked more like a college campus than any kind of social service facility Maria had ever seen. The people they passed in the hallways looked purposeful and confident, many of them carrying books or laptops, engaged in animated conversations about projects and deadlines. Maria's apartment was small, but comfortable, with a real bed, a private bathroom, and a window that looked out onto the gardens. After months of sleeping on cardboard, the simple luxury of a clean, private space made her want to cry. Dinner is served in the main dining room from 5 to 7, David explained as he showed her around. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet with Dr. Sarah Chun, our program director, to begin your assessment. Tonight, just rest. Eat something good. Take a hot shower. Tomorrow, we begin the real work. After David left, Maria sat on the edge of the bed, still barely believing that any of this was real. She pulled out her phone and, for the first time in weeks, called Emma without having to rehearse lies about how well things were going. Mommy. Emma's voice was bright with surprise and joy. I wasn't expecting you to call until Sunday. I have some news, sweetheart, Maria said, tears flowing freely now. Some really good news. Mommy is going back to school, kind of like you do, but for grown-ups. It's going to help me get a really good job so we can be together again soon. Really? Emma's excitement was infectious. What kind of school? The kind that teaches people how to be successful, Maria said, looking around her small apartment with wonder. The kind that helps people remember what they're good at and teaches them new things, too. As they talked, Emma chattering about her day at school and her cousins and all the things she wanted to show Maria when she came to visit, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in almost a year. She felt like herself again. Not completely, not yet, but like the person she used to be was still there, buried under months of survival and desperation, waiting to be rediscovered and rebuilt. Tomorrow would begin the hardest work of her life. But tonight, for the first time in months, Maria Santos fell asleep in a real bed, clean and fed and full of hope. The alarm in Maria's small apartment went off at 6 a.m. sharp, just as Dr. Sarah Chun had told her it would. For a moment, Maria lay in bed disoriented, the clean sheets and solid mattress so foreign after months of sleeping on concrete that she wondered if she was dreaming. Then, reality flooded back. The Phoenix program, David Richardson, the chance to rebuild her life from the ground up. Maria had been at the Phoenix Center for 2 weeks now, and every day had been more challenging than the last. What she had initially thought would be some kind of job training program turned out to be something much more comprehensive and much more difficult than anything she had imagined. Dr. Chun was waiting for her in the assessment room, as she had been every morning since Maria arrived. The doctor was a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an unshakable patience that Maria was beginning to understand masked an incredible strength. Dr. Chun had been homeless herself once. She had told Maria during their first meeting and had been one of David Richardson's earliest success stories. "Good morning, Maria," Dr. Chun said, gesturing for her to take a seat in the comfortable chair across from her desk. "How are you feeling today?" It was the same question every morning, but Maria was learning that it wasn't just pleasantries. Dr. Chan was tracking her emotional and mental state with the same careful attention that a doctor might monitor a patient recovering from surgery. Because that's what Maria was doing. She was beginning to understand. She was recovering from trauma that went much deeper than just losing her job and her home. Anxious, Maria answered honestly. She had learned that honesty, no matter how uncomfortable, was the foundation of everything at the Phoenix Center. "Yesterday's session was difficult, and I keep thinking about what we might uncover today." Dr. Chin nodded approvingly. The previous day had been particularly challenging, with Maria working through the timeline of how she had ended up homeless. Not just the external events, but the internal patterns of thinking that had contributed to each decision. It was painful work, like performing surgery on herself while fully conscious. "That's understandable," Dr. Chin said. "Today we're going to continue exploring some of the core beliefs you have about yourself and your worth. I know it's uncomfortable, but remember that we're not doing this to cause you pain. We're doing it to free you from patterns that have been limiting your potential for years." Maria had come to understand that the Phoenix program operated on a philosophy that was radically different from any other approach to helping people in crisis. Instead of just addressing immediate needs like housing and employment, the program dug deep into the psychological and emotional roots of why people ended up in desperate situations in the first place. "Many of our participants," Dr. Chen had explained during Maria's first week, "are incredibly capable people who have been undermined by internal programming that tells them they don't deserve success or happiness. These beliefs are usually formed early in life and reinforced by trauma and setbacks. Until we address these core beliefs, any external changes are likely to be temporary." Maria was discovering that this was painfully true in her own case. As they worked through her history, patterns emerged that she had never noticed before. The way she always assumed the worst would happen. The way she took responsibility for things that weren't her fault. The way she consistently undervalued her own abilities while overestimating obstacles. "Growing up in foster care taught me not to expect too much," Maria had told Dr. Chen the week before. Getting attached to people or possibilities just led to disappointment when they got taken away. That was a reasonable survival strategy for a child in an unstable situation, Dr. Chen had replied. But now it's a barrier to creating the stable life you want for yourself and Emma. "We need to help you develop new strategies that serve your current goals instead of your past fears." The work was exhausting in a way that physical labor never was. Every day, Maria felt like she was being taken apart and examined piece by piece. Her assumptions, her fears, her dreams, her patterns of thinking that she had never questioned before were all put under a microscope and analyzed. But alongside the individual therapy sessions with Dr. Chun, Maria was also participating in group sessions with other Phoenix program participants. There were 12 people in her cohort, all at different stages of the 18-month program. Some had been there for over a year and were preparing for their final work placements. Others, like Maria, were still in the early stages of what everyone in the center called foundation work. The group sessions were led by Marcus Williams, a tall man with gentle eyes and an easy smile who had completed the Phoenix program 5 years earlier and now worked as a counselor at the center. Marcus had been addicted to drugs and living on the streets for 3 years before entering the program. Now, he had a master's degree in counseling and helped others navigate the same transformation he had experienced. The thing about hitting bottom, Marcus often told the group, is that it gives you a solid place to build from. But first, you have to be willing to acknowledge that you're actually at the bottom, and that's harder than most people think. Maria was learning that this was true. Even after months of being homeless, Part of her had still been clinging to the idea that her situation was temporary, that she just needed one good break, and everything would go back to normal. Accepting that her old normal hadn't been working, that she needed to fundamentally change her approach to life, was more difficult than sleeping in an alley had been. The other participants in Maria's group each had their own stories, but the themes were remarkably similar. Jessica had been a successful real estate agent until a combination of market changes and personal problems led to bankruptcy and eventually homelessness. Robert had been an auto mechanic who lost his job, developed a drinking problem, and spiraled into a depression so severe that he stopped being able to function. Sarah had been a teacher who suffered a nervous breakdown after her husband's death and couldn't return to work. All of them were intelligent, capable people who had been undone by circumstances and their own psychological patterns. All of them were discovering that recovery involved much more than just getting a job and an apartment. The hardest part, Jessica had shared during a recent group session, is accepting that I wasn't just unlucky, that I made choices that contributed to my situation. Because if I was just a victim of circumstances, then I don't have any control over whether it happens again. But if I accept that my choices matter, then I have to take responsibility for making better ones. Maria understood exactly what Jessica meant. It was easier to blame the economy, bad luck, or unfair circumstances than to examine her own role in how her life had unfolded. But Dr. Chun was helping her see that taking responsibility wasn't about blame or shame. It was about power. When you accept that your choices have consequences, Dr. Chun had explained, you also accept that you have the power to make different choices that will have different consequences. That's what gives you control over your future. The work wasn't just psychological. The Phoenix Center also provided intensive practical training and life skills that many of the participants had never learned or had forgotten how to use effectively. There were classes on financial management, communication skills, professional behavior, and time management. Maria was surprised to discover how many basic life skills she had been managing poorly, even during the times when her life had seemed stable. Most people learn these skills gradually through trial and error over many years, explained Janet Morrison, the center's life skills coordinator. But when your life falls apart, you need to rebuild these skills quickly and correctly. We can't afford trial and error when the stakes are this high. Maria was learning to budget not just for basic survival, but for long-term financial stability. She was learning to communicate assertively without being aggressive, to set boundaries without being defensive, to ask for help without feeling shameful. These skills felt foreign at first, like trying to speak a language she had only heard but never practiced. The days at the Phoenix Center were structured from morning until evening. After breakfast and individual therapy, there were educational sessions, group therapy, practical skills training, physical fitness, and study time. The pace was intense, designed to keep participants focused on growth rather than dwelling on past failures. But it was during the quiet evening hours in her apartment that Maria did some of her most important work. Dr. Chun had given her a series of writing exercises designed to help her process everything she was learning and discovering about herself. Write about the person you were before everything fell apart had been one assignment. Not your circumstances, but who you were as a person. What were your strengths? What brought you joy? What were you proud of? It had taken Maria 3 attempts to complete that exercise because she kept getting overwhelmed by emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Remembering the person she used to be was both inspiring and heartbreaking. That woman had been confident, creative, and optimistic. She had believed in her ability to solve problems and create a good life for herself and Emma. Where did she go? Maria had asked Dr. Chun after sharing what she had written. How did I lose myself so completely? You didn't lose her, Dr. Chun had replied. She's still there, but she's been buried under survival strategies and trauma responses. The person you're remembering isn't gone. She's just been protecting herself by hiding. Our job is to create an environment where it's safe for her to come back out. Maria was beginning to catch glimpses of that former self during the program activities. When they did problem-solving exercises, her mind felt sharp and creative in ways it hadn't for months. When she participated in group discussions, she found herself offering insights and perspectives that helped other people. When she worked on her writing assignments, words flowed with an ease that reminded her of who she had been before desperation consumed all her mental energy. But the progress wasn't linear. Some days, Maria felt strong and hopeful, convinced that she was going to succeed in transforming her life. Other days, the weight of everything she had lost and everything she still needed to accomplish felt overwhelming. She would look around at the other participants who were further along in their programs and wonder if she had the strength to do what they had done. It was during one of these difficult days, about a month into her time at the Phoenix Center, that Maria had her first major breakthrough. She had been struggling with a writing exercise about forgiveness, specifically about forgiving herself for the choices that had contributed to her situation. "I can't forgive myself for failing Emma," she had told Dr. Chun through tears. She deserved a mother who could protect her from all of this. She deserved stability and security, and I couldn't give her that. Dr. Chun had listened patiently, as she always did, before asking a question that stopped Maria in her tracks. If Emma were an adult and came to you having experienced everything you've been through, would you tell her she was unforgivable? Would you tell her she deserved to be homeless and separated from her children because she had made mistakes and experienced bad luck? Maria had been horrified at the thought. Of course not. I would tell her that she was strong and brave for surviving. I would tell her that making mistakes doesn't make her a bad person and that everyone deserves a chance to rebuild their life. Then why, Dr. Chun had asked gently, don't you deserve the same compassion from yourself? That conversation had opened something in Maria that she hadn't realized had been locked away. For the first time since her life had fallen apart, she began to see herself with some of the kindness she would show to anyone else in her situation. She began to understand that the voice in her head telling her she was worthless and undeserving wasn't telling her the truth. It was just trauma talking, trying to protect her from further disappointment by convincing her not to hope for anything better. As the weeks passed, Maria began to notice changes in herself that went beyond just feeling more stable. She was sleeping better, eating more regularly, and taking care of her appearance in ways that had nothing to do with impressing other people and everything to do with respecting herself. She was engaging more actively in group discussions, offering support to newer participants, and beginning to think about what kind of work she might want to do when she completed the program. But perhaps most importantly, her phone calls with Emma were becoming more authentic. Instead of pretending that everything was fine, Maria was able to share honestly about the work she was doing to rebuild their life together. "I'm learning about why grown-ups sometimes make mistakes that hurt the people they love," she told Emma during one of their weekly calls. "And I'm learning how to make better choices so that won't happen again." "Are you fixing yourself, Mommy?" Emma had asked with the directness that only children possess. "I'm learning how to be the best version of myself," Maria had replied. "The version of me that could take really good care of you and never has to worry about not having enough money or a safe place to live." Emma's excitement about her mother's progress was palpable through the phone. "When you're all fixed, will you come get me? I'm going to come visit you next month," Maria promised, something that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. "And when I'm completely ready, we're going to be together again. But this time, it's going to be different. This time, we're going to build something that no one can take away from us." As Maria hung up the phone that evening, she realized that for the first time in over a year, she actually believed the promises she was making to her daughter. Not because someone else was going to save them, but because she was finally learning how to save herself. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her blazer and checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror one more time. Today marked the beginning of her final phase at the Phoenix Center, the mentored work experience that would bridge her transformation from program participant to professional. After 9 months of intensive therapy, education, and skill building, she was about to step into the corporate world as a junior project coordinator at Richardson Enterprises. The woman looking back at her in the mirror bore little resemblance to the broken person who had arrived at the Phoenix Center. Maria's hair was styled professionally, her clothes fit properly, and her posture radiated confidence. But the most significant change was in her eyes. Where there had once been desperation and shame, there was now determination and hope. Dr. Chun had warned her that this transition would be challenging in unexpected ways. Many participants find that the work phase brings up new fears and anxieties, she had explained during their last individual session. You're moving from an environment where everyone understands your journey to one where people will judge you primarily on your performance. That can feel overwhelming. Maria understood what Dr. Chun meant. For 9 months, she had been surrounded by people who knew her story and were invested in her success. At Richardson Enterprises, she would be just another employee, expected to perform at a high level regardless of her past circumstances. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. The journey to this point had been more difficult than anything Maria could have imagined when she first agreed to enter the program. After the initial breakthrough about self-forgiveness, the work had become even more intense. Dr. Chin had guided her through examining every major relationship and decision in her life, helping her identify patterns that had sabotaged her success and happiness. One of the most difficult sessions had been about Emma's father, Carlos, and the way their relationship had ended. Maria had always told herself that she had been the victim of his abandonment, but Dr. Chin had helped her see how her own fear of vulnerability had contributed to the distance between them. I was so afraid he would leave, Maria had realized during one particularly emotional session, that I started pulling away first. I convinced myself I was protecting Emma and myself, but really I was just confirming my belief that people always leave eventually. Understanding these patterns was just the beginning. The real work had been learning new ways of thinking and behaving that supported the life she wanted to create. Maria had spent months practicing assertive communication, learning to set healthy boundaries, and developing the confidence to advocate for herself and her needs. The educational component of the program had been equally challenging. Based on her aptitude tests and interests, Maria had been placed in an accelerated program combining business administration with project management. The coursework was demanding, requiring her to study and complete assignments at a pace that pushed her to her limits. But it had also awakened an intellectual hunger that had been dormant since college. Maria discovered that she had a natural talent for organizing complex projects and managing competing priorities. Her experience as a single mother had given her skills in multitasking and crisis management that translated perfectly to the business world. More importantly, her journey through homelessness and recovery had given her a perspective on resilience and problem-solving that her classmates, who had never faced real adversity, could match. The group dynamics at the Phoenix Center had also taught Maria valuable lessons about leadership and teamwork. As one of the more stable participants in her cohort, she had naturally taken on a mentoring role with newer arrivals. She had helped Jessica work through a panic attack during a particularly difficult therapy session. She had studied with Robert when he struggled with the financial management coursework. She had listened to Sarah's fears about returning to teaching after a breakdown. "You have natural leadership abilities," Marcus Williams had observed during one of their group sessions. "You instinctively know how to support others without enabling them, how to challenge people while making them feel safe. Those are rare and valuable skills." Maria had been surprised by this feedback. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but she was beginning to understand that her life experiences had taught her things about human nature and motivation that couldn't be learned in a classroom. Now, as she walked into the gleaming lobby of Richardson Enterprises, Maria felt the weight of all that preparation. This wasn't just a job opportunity. It was the culmination of the most intensive period of growth and learning in her life. Everything she had discovered about herself, every skill she had developed, every fear she had conquered would be tested in this professional environment. David Richardson was waiting for her in the lobby, just as he had promised. Over the months of her program, Maria had seen him regularly during his visits to the Phoenix Center, but their relationship had evolved from that of rescuer and victim to something more like mentor and protege. David had watched her transformation with obvious pride, but he had also made it clear that her success would ultimately depend on her own efforts. "Ready for your first day?" David asked with a warm smile as they rode the elevator to the 15th floor. "As ready as I can be," Maria replied honestly. She had learned that false confidence was less valuable than authentic self-awareness. The project management department was bustling with activity, filled with young professionals working on laptops, clustered around whiteboards covered with diagrams and timelines, and engaged in animated discussions about deadlines and deliverables. Maria felt a moment of intimidation as she took in the scene. These people looked so polished, so competent, so naturally at home in this world. But then she remembered Dr. Chen's words, "You belong in any room you enter." Your value isn't determined by your past circumstances, but by what you bring to the present moment. Maria's supervisor was Jennifer Liu, a woman in her early 30s who had been with Richardson Enterprises for 5 years and had worked her way up from an entry-level position. Jennifer was aware that Maria was a Phoenix program graduate, but she had made it clear that this wouldn't result in special treatment. "I expect the same level of performance from you that I would from any other new hire," Jennifer had told Maria during their first meeting. "Your background is irrelevant to me. What matters is whether you could do the job." Maria appreciated Jennifer's directness. She didn't want to be seen as a charity case or a social experiment. She wanted to prove that she could succeed based on her abilities and work ethic. Her first assignment was to assist with the coordination of a major software implementation project for one of Richardson Enterprises' largest clients. The project involved multiple departments, dozens of stakeholders, and a timeline that left no room for error. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-pressure situation that would test everything Maria had learned. As Maria dove into the project details, she felt a familiar sense of excitement that she hadn't experienced since her days at Peterson Industries. The work was challenging, but it was also engaging in a way that made her feel fully alive. She found herself staying late, not because she had to, but because she was genuinely interested in solving the problems and finding better ways to coordinate the various moving pieces. Within her first month, Maria had identified several inefficiencies in the project workflow and proposed solutions that saved both time and money. Her suggestions were implemented, and Jennifer began giving her more complex responsibilities. Other team members started seeking her input on their projects, recognizing her ability to see patterns and connections that others missed. But perhaps more importantly, Maria was learning to navigate the interpersonal dynamics of the corporate world. The skills she had developed in therapy about communication and boundary setting proved invaluable in managing relationships with colleagues, clients, and vendors. She knew how to be collaborative without being a pushover, how to be assertive without being aggressive, and how to handle conflict in ways that led to solutions rather than escalation. The transformation wasn't just professional. Maria's personal life was also stabilizing in ways she hadn't dared to hope for. She had moved out of the Phoenix Center into her own apartment, a modest but comfortable one-bedroom place that felt like a palace after her months of homelessness. She was managing her finances carefully, building an emergency fund, and planning for the future instead of just surviving day to day. Most importantly, her relationship with Emma was healing. Maria had been able to visit her daughter several times during her program, and Emma had been amazed by the changes in her mother. Instead of the stressed, desperate woman who had left her in California, Emma saw someone who was calm, confident, and genuinely excited about the future. "You seem happy, Mommy," Emma had observed during Maria's most recent visit. Not pretend happy like before, but really happy. Maria's plan was to bring Emma back to Chicago once she had completed her full 18 months at the Phoenix Center and had established stable employment. The separation had been painful, but it had also allowed Maria to focus completely on her recovery and transformation without the additional stress of parenting during such an intensive period. The final months of her program flew by in a blur of increasing responsibility and growing confidence. Maria was promoted to Associate Project Coordinator, with a salary that was higher than anything she had earned in her previous career. She was assigned her own projects to manage and began mentoring newer Phoenix program graduates who were starting their work placements. It was during this period that Maria began to understand the full scope of what David Richardson had created with the Phoenix program. She wasn't just another success story. She was part of a growing network of people who had been given second chances and were now positioned to create positive change in their communities and industries. At the monthly Phoenix program alumni meetings, Maria met graduates who had gone on to start their own businesses, earn advanced degrees, and take leadership roles in various organizations. They shared a common bond that went beyond their shared experience of hitting bottom. They understood what it meant to rebuild yourself from nothing, and that understanding made them more compassionate leaders and more resilient professionals. Maria also began to see how her own story could inspire others. She started speaking at Phoenix Center orientations, sharing her journey with new participants who were in the same desperate place she had been 18 months earlier. She could see herself in their eyes, the fear, the hope, the disbelief that their lives could really change. The hardest part, she would tell them, isn't learning new skills or finding a job. The hardest part is believing you deserve something better than what you have now. But if I could learn to believe that about myself, you can too. As Maria's 18 months in the Phoenix program neared their end, she found herself facing a decision she hadn't expected. Richardson Enterprises had offered her a permanent position with significant growth potential, but she was also being recruited by other companies who had heard about her work through professional networks. More surprisingly, David Richardson had approached her about potentially joining the Phoenix program staff, helping to expand the program to other cities, and taking on a leadership role in developing new approaches to helping people overcome homelessness and poverty. You understand this work in a way that someone who hasn't lived it never could, David had told her. But you also have the professional skills and business acumen to help us scale this program and reach more people. You could have a significant impact on addressing these issues systemically. The choice felt overwhelming in the best possible way. 18 months earlier, Maria's biggest decision had been which dumpster to search for food. Now she was being offered multiple paths to a successful future, each with its own possibilities and challenges. But as she considered her options, Maria realized that the most important decision had already been made. She had chosen to believe in herself, to do the hard work of transformation, and to accept that she deserved a better life. Everything else was just details. The woman who had once slept in an alley behind a grocery store was now planning a future that included not just personal success, but the opportunity to help others experience their own transformation. It was more than Maria had ever dared to hope for, but it was also exactly what she had earned through months of the most difficult work of her life. As she prepared to make her final presentation to complete the Phoenix program, Maria thought about that conversation with David on the park bench that had started it all. He had told her that someone had once believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself, and that belief had changed everything. Now Maria understood that the real magic of the Phoenix program wasn't just about individual transformation. It was about creating a cycle of hope and opportunity that could spread far beyond any single person's story. She had been saved, but more importantly, she had learned how to save herself. And now she had the knowledge and ability to help others do the same. 3 years after graduation from the Phoenix program, Maria Santos stood at the podium of the Chicago Convention Center, looking out at an audience of over 2,000 social workers, policymakers, business leaders, and formerly homeless individuals. The conference, Transforming Lives, Revolutionary Approaches to Ending Homelessness, was the culmination of everything she had worked toward since completing her 18-month journey from street to success. As the newly appointed national director of the Phoenix program, Maria was about to announce the expansion of the program to 12 major cities across the United States. But more than that, she was about to share data that would fundamentally change how America approached the issue of homelessness. 5 years ago, Maria began, her voice clear and confident. "I was sleeping in an alley behind a grocery store in downtown Chicago. I was a statistic, a problem to be managed, a person that most of society had written off as a lost cause." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Maria had learned to use her story strategically, not as a plea for sympathy, but as evidence of human potential that conventional approaches to homelessness consistently failed to recognize. Today, the Phoenix program has graduated 847 individuals from homelessness to professional careers. Our retention rate is 91%, meaning that over 5 years later, these graduates are still employed, still housed, and still contributing to their communities. More importantly, they're breaking cycles of poverty that in many cases had persisted for generations. The statistics were staggering, especially compared to traditional approaches to homelessness that focus primarily on emergency shelter and basic services. The Phoenix program's comprehensive approach to transformation had proven that with the right support, most people experiencing homelessness could not just be housed, but could excel professionally and personally in ways that benefited entire communities. But for Maria, the numbers were just part of a much larger story. Behind each statistic was a human being who had experienced the same transformation she had undergone. People like Rebecca Martinez, who had gone from living in her car to heading customer relations and was now developing training programs for other companies. People like Frank Morrison, the Vietnam veteran who had taught Maria about street survival and who is now a counselor specializing in trauma recovery for other veterans. The expansion of the Phoenix program had become Maria's life mission, but it had required her to step even further outside her comfort zone than her original transformation had. After completing her program, Maria had worked at Richardson Enterprises for 2 years, distinguishing herself as an exceptional project manager and earning the respect of colleagues who never knew about her past circumstances. But it was David Richardson who had ultimately convinced her that her impact could be much greater if she focused on scaling the program that had saved her life. "You understand this work from the inside," David had told her during one of their regular mentoring sessions. "You know what works and what doesn't, not from theory, but from lived experience." That perspective is invaluable in designing programs that actually transform lives instead of just managing problems. The decision to leave her successful corporate career to join the Phoenix program staff had been difficult. Maria had finally achieved the stability she had dreamed of during those desperate months on the street. She had her own apartment, a reliable income, and had been able to bring Emma back to live with her. Taking on the challenge of expanding the program meant risking that security for something much less certain. But Emma, now 12 years old and wise beyond her years, had been the one to help Maria make the decision. "Mom," Emma had said during one of their conversations about the opportunity, "you always tell me that we should use our talents to help other people. This is your chance to help lots of people the way that man helped you." Emma had a perspective on her mother's transformation that was unique among all the Phoenix program graduates. She had witnessed firsthand both the devastation of homelessness and the power of comprehensive recovery. More than that, she had experienced how her mother's transformation had affected their entire family dynamic. "I'm proud of what you went through," Emma had told Maria on the 3rd anniversary of her graduation from the Phoenix program. "Not proud that bad things happened to you, but proud that you were strong enough to change everything. And I'm proud that you want to help other kids not have to worry about their moms the way I had to worry about you." Emma's support had given Maria the confidence to take on what seemed like an impossible challenge, convincing government agencies, private foundations, and corporate partners to invest in an approach to homelessness that was more expensive up front than traditional methods, but that produced results no other program had been able to achieve. The first year of expansion had been exhausting. Maria had traveled constantly, presenting the Phoenix program model to mayors, social service directors, and potential funders in cities across the country. She had to learn to translate her personal experience and Dr. Chin's psychological insights in a language that resonated with budget-conscious administrators and results-oriented business leaders. The breakthrough had come when Maria started bringing other Phoenix program graduates with her to presentations. Instead of just talking about transformation, she could show it. Audiences would meet people like Marcus Williams, the former counselor who had completed a master's degree and was now pursuing a doctorate in social work, or Sarah Chun, the former teacher who had not only returned to education, but had become a principal and was implementing innovative approaches to supporting students from unstable home situations. The Phoenix program doesn't just change individual lives, Maria would explain to these audiences. It changes communities. Every graduate becomes a contributor instead of a drain on social services. They pay taxes instead of requiring assistance. They mentor others instead of needing mentorship. The return on investment is extraordinary when you look at the long-term impact. But perhaps even more compelling than the economic arguments was the simple human evidence that transformation was possible. When audiences met Phoenix program graduates, they couldn't maintain their assumptions about homeless individuals being fundamentally different from themselves. They saw intelligent, articulate, successful people who had simply experienced circumstances that could happen to anyone. The expansion had required Maria to develop skills she never knew she possessed. She learned to write grant proposals, to negotiate with government agencies, to manage budgets in the millions of dollars, and to lead teams of professionals who had much more formal education and experience than she did. But her lived experience gave her credibility and insights that no amount of academic training could provide. The second Phoenix Center had opened in Atlanta, followed by programs in Seattle, Phoenix, and Denver. Each location required adaptation to local conditions and resources, but the core model remained the same. Comprehensive psychological and practical support designed to address the root causes of homelessness rather than just its symptoms. Maria had also pushed for innovations that went beyond David Richardson's original vision. She had advocated for programs specifically designed for families, so that parents like her wouldn't have to be separated from their children during recovery. She had developed specialized tracks for veterans, for individuals recovering from addiction, and for young adults aging out of foster care. Most importantly, she had insisted on hiring Phoenix program graduates as staff members at every level. Half of the counselors, case managers, and administrators in the expanded program were people who had once been homeless themselves. This wasn't just about providing employment opportunities. It was about ensuring that the program never lost touch with the realities of the experience it was designed to address. You can't help someone climb out of a hole, Maria often said, unless you remember what it felt like to be at the bottom of that hole yourself. The results spoke for themselves. Cities with Phoenix programs saw dramatic reductions in chronic homelessness, decreased strain on emergency services, and increased economic activity as graduates began contributing to local economies. More than that, the programs were changing public attitudes toward homelessness, demonstrating that with proper support, most people experiencing homelessness could become productive, successful community members. But success brought new challenges. The demand for Phoenix program services far exceeded the capacity, and Maria found herself in the position of having to choose which cities would receive programs and which would have to wait. The success also attracted criticism from some traditional social service providers who saw the program as a threat to existing approaches, and from conservative politicians who questioned the cost and comprehensiveness of the intervention. Maria had learned to handle these challenges with the same resilience she had developed during her own recovery. She focused on results rather than rhetoric, on evidence rather than ideology. When critics questioned the expense of the program, she showed them the long-term cost savings. When they questioned whether transformation was really possible, she introduced them to graduates. The most meaningful part of Maria's work, though, wasn't the policy victories or the program expansions. It was the individual moments when she met someone who reminded her of herself 3 years earlier. The desperate single mother who didn't believe her situation could change. The veteran who had given up hope of ever having a normal life. The young person who felt invisible to the world. I'm not going to tell you this is going to be easy, Maria would tell new Phoenix program participants during orientation sessions. I'm going to tell you that it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. But I'm also going to tell you that you have strengths you don't even know about yet. And if you're willing to do the work, you can build a life that's better than anything you've ever imagined. Standing at the podium of the convention center, Maria looked out at the audience and saw her younger self in many of the faces. People who were curious about whether transformation was really possible, skeptical that someone like them could ever achieve stability and success, hopeful despite their fear that maybe, just maybe, their lives could be different. The Phoenix program works, Maria continued her presentation, not because we give people handouts, but because we give them something much more valuable, the opportunity to discover their own potential and the support they need to develop it fully. We don't rescue people from homelessness. We teach them to rescue themselves. After her presentation, Maria was approached by Dr. Sarah Chun, who had been in the audience. Dr. Chun was now the Chief Clinical Officer for all Phoenix program locations, and she had watched Maria's transformation from desperate homeless mother to national leader with obvious pride. "Do you remember," Dr. Chun asked with a smile, "when you told me you couldn't forgive yourself for failing Emma?" Maria laughed. "I remember a lot of things I said that weren't true. That was probably one of the most untrue. Emma is here today," Dr. Chun said, gesturing toward the back of the auditorium. "She wanted to surprise you." Maria looked where Dr. Chun was pointing and saw Emma, now a confident 12-year-old, standing with David Richardson. Emma was holding a sign that read, "My mom changes the world," and her smile was radiant with pride. As Maria walked toward her daughter, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From sleeping in an alley to speaking at national conferences. From being separated by desperation to being reunited through transformation. From believing she had nothing to offer the world to leading a movement that was changing how society addressed one of its most persistent problems. But most importantly, from teaching Emma that life could defeat you to showing her that you could defeat life's challenges and help others do the same. "How was Mom's speech?" Maria asked as she hugged Emma. "It was okay," Emma said with the casual confidence of a child who had grown up watching her mother speak to audiences of hundreds. "But the best part was when you talked about me. I like that you told everyone that kids can be part of helping their parents get better." Emma had indeed been part of Maria's recovery in ways that went far beyond just being motivation. Their weekly phone calls during Maria's time at the Phoenix Center had kept her connected to her purpose. Emma's visits had shown her what she was working toward, and Emma's forgiveness for the months they had been apart had taught Maria how to forgive herself. Now Emma was part of Maria's work in an even more direct way. She had started a support group for children whose parents were going through the Phoenix program, helping them understand what their parents were experiencing and giving them tools to be supportive without taking on adult responsibilities. Kids know when their parents are struggling, Emma had explained to a group of Phoenix program staff members. It's better to help them understand what's happening than to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. As they walked out of the convention center together, Maria reflected on how completely her life had been transformed. Not just her circumstances, but her understanding of what was possible for herself and for others facing similar challenges. The alley behind Henderson's grocery store seemed like something from another lifetime, but Maria knew it would always be part of her story. Not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of how much could change when someone believed in human potential and was willing to invest in transformation rather than just management of problems. 3 years ago, David Richardson had seen something in Maria that she couldn't see in herself. Today, Maria was extending that same vision to thousands of people across the country, creating a network of transformation that was changing not just individual lives, but entire communities' approaches to homelessness. As she and Emma drove home to their comfortable apartment, Maria thought about all the people who would sleep on the streets that night, and about all the Phoenix program graduates who would go to sleep in their own beds, in their own homes, surrounded by evidence of their transformed lives. Tomorrow, the work would continue. More cities to visit, more programs to establish, more lives to touch with the possibility of transformation. But tonight, Maria Santos, former homeless single mother turned national leader, would have dinner with her daughter and help her with homework, living proof that no matter how far you fall, you can always rise again. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you can help others learn to fly.